Hi, this is Pia Knudsen from UFO Denmark. On behalf of our group, UFO Denmark, we would like to welcome Robert and Marilyn Salas, who today is going to share their experiences with UFOs and contacts. So, welcome. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Pia, for inviting us. We're very happy to talk to you again. Last time we saw you was in Norway.
Yes, right.
Yes, it was.
Yeah. Great to connect with you again.
Yes,
Thank you so much for inviting us.
Welcome. It's our pleasure. You can just begin when you're ready, and we're looking forward to hearing what you have to tell us.
Okay, great.
Okay, so I'll be back later.
Marilyn will be back in a little while. I'm just going to go through my standard presentation. And the image you see right now is taken from an actual video photograph. But the reason I have it here is because it's very similar to the image that was seen during my incident. Okay, I'll start in 1994. So in 1994, I had was thinking of changing, and I'd worked for the FAA for over 20 years, and so I decided to become a teacher. And I was in a bookstore and happened to pick up this book called Above Top Secret by Timothy Good. And I happened to turn to page 301 of this book, and there on that page was a short paragraph talking about UFOs over missile sites in Montana in 1967. It was a very short paragraph, but I got excited because I thought the Air Force had declassified this incident. So I contacted someone from MUFON in Seattle and asked him to send a FOIA request, Freedom of Information request, to the Air Force asking for documentation about the Echo flight shutdown. Echo flight was one of the missile sites, command sites that in Montana, and I thought I was there during my incident. I wasn't sure. It had been so long, I'd forgotten exactly where I was. We had some 15 sites in Montana, and I was normally at Oscar flight, but I could have been at Echo. At any rate, I said, don't say anything about UFOs, just ask if they could send documents, and so they did, and declassified this particular incident, shutdown of missiles. I didn't anything about a UFO encounter, and they did not also say anything about a UFO encounter at this point. However, because they did declassify information, I felt strongly that I should go public, and so I did. And I started going public after receiving this declassified material. That was a little difficult, but I was finally able to recover some memories and also locate some key witnesses. Yeah, here's myself, and then Fred Mywald, who was my commander in the capsule. Walt Fiegel was the commander of Echo Flight, and then there are a few others there, but we'll just move on. So this shows the field, the missile field, from that was under control of Malmstrom Air Force Base, which is about the center of Great Falls, Montana. Montana is up at the northern part of the United States, right at the Canadian border. These large dots, circles, are what we call a launch control facility. That's where I was located at, and I'll show you the exact location in the capsule. But I want to point out to my audience here that here's Echo 1, where I'm pointing to now in the eastern part of this map, and then here's Oscar 1 down here. This is about 100 miles east of Great Falls, Montana, Malmstrom Air Force Base. So here we have the actual photograph of the Oscar Launch Control Facility. That's where I was located at the time. And you can see the large fence or gate and the fencing around this facility. I was located underground, about 60 underground. And we had this fence surrounding the facility. Here's the location of the guardhouse. We had about 6 guards. And then this image on the right is called the launch facility. That's where the missiles are actually located. They're about a mile or so from the Launch Control Center. Here you can see the missile, the cover, etc. Okay, so on March 24th, 1967, the commander and I, Fred Mywald and myself, were at this facility we called Oscar Flight. You can see the control panel here. We had control of 10 nuclear missiles, and this is all outlined in my book, Fated Giant. I'll briefly go over the incident. I was on duty when I received a phone call from my topside guard, and he said that there were strange lights in the sky flying overhead, making strange maneuvers at high speeds, making 90-degree turns, stopping and then reversing course. The guard said they were not, they didn't know of any kind of an airplane that could do what they were doing. So I thought it was kind of interesting, but I didn't pay much attention to it. I thought maybe he was, I don't know. I just didn't know what to think. So I terminated the call, and then 5 minutes later he calls back. This time he's screaming into the phone. He's upset. He's angry. He's frightened. He says there's a glowing red object hovering just above the front gate, and wanted me to tell him what to do. He had all the guards out there, but it sounded to me like we were under some sort of an attack or a possible attack at this location. So I told him to take whatever action he needed to keep anything out, anything from entering the gated area. So at that point, he hung up, and I went to tell my commander about the phone calls. And then just as I was about to tell him about the phone calls, the missiles started shutting down. They went from a launchable status, a green status, to a red no-go status, meaning they could not be launched. We did have a way of querying the system. It's called the Versa system, which told us what the problem was. And the system told us that it was control system failure on each of the missiles. Now, you must understand the missiles were controlled by separate cables leading from the capsule, underground cables, and each missile had its own cabling system. So it was not as though if we lost one, they would all go out. Each missile was separately controlled. Well, my commander called back at the command post and told them about this incident, and they said the same thing had happened actually a week before. I thought at that night that the same thing happened that night, but it had happened a week before. So that was the Echo flight incident, and I'll talk about the next. Okay, so on March 16th, 1967, Walter Fiegel was in command of the 10 nuclear missiles, and again, his location was here, outlined in red. It's about 30 miles from Oscar Flight. only he happened to have guards and security people and maintenance people at the two of the launch facilities where the missiles were, and Walt Fiegel saw one of the missiles go down and called out there to the guard, and he said they had UFO overhead, that they had not done anything. And at that point, all 10 missiles in Echo flight shut down while UFOs were overhead. So we had, within the span of 8 days, we had 20 nuclear missiles shut down, disabled, while UFOs were overhead. Okay, this is one of the first documents we received. It's a message sent to all Strategic Air Command missile bases, and it's a secret message saying that all 10 missiles in Echo flight at Maelstrom lost strategic alert within 10 seconds of each other. And then it goes on to say that this is cause for grave concern because the cause of missile shutdown cannot be readily identified. And the message goes on to ask for an immediate investigation as to the cause of these shutdowns. This is another document we received. It's the only document that we had stating something about UFOs. Rumors of UFO around the area of Echo flight during the time of fault were disproven. Well, that did not turn out to be correct. There was no way to disprove the reports from these people. These were security guards, like I said, and also maintenance people. We had received a letter from the man that wrote that report. He said none of the guards were ever interviewed about these incidents. So this was clearly an attempt to cover up the incident. As to what caused it, the Air Force thought that they identified a piece of equipment called the logic coupler. And it says here, and this is another official document, says the opinion of the team was that external generated signals caused the generation of the shutdown. Now, the possibility of this is very remote due to the fact that all 10 missiles would have had to have shut down within seconds of each other. So this is a very remote possibility, meaning they could not explain how this could possibly happen. This is a photograph of Robert Jameson. He was the maintenance officer called in to bring Oscar flight back on alert status. He verified the date of the incident, March 24th, and also the fact that all 10 missiles had shut down Oscar flight. And he was also told by his supervisor that UFOs were the cause at the time. And this is an image of Dwayne Arneson. He actually saw a telegram from Strategic Air Command headquarters, or to Strategic Air Command headquarters, saying that the Echo and Oscar flights were a result of UFO incidents. There was an incident March 24th, same day as my incident, where a truck driver observed a UFO very closely, traveling at the same rate as his own truck. He slams on the brakes and sees the object hovering for a while and then landing in the ravine nearby. he called the highway patrol, and they sent an officer who verified the object had landed. So this is a verifiable incident. It was written up in the local newspaper and also investigated by the Air Force. So it was the incident that Jameson recalled on the same day that he was sent out to investigate the Oscar flight shutdowns. I take in that same time period. So this is just the report that the Air Force did on the belt sighting by that truck driver, and the object was seen not only at belt but over the base and by many of the Air Force personnel. That was verified in a newspaper report at the time, and also in this investigative report. So I'm going to talk about the cover-up of these two incidents next. This is Dr. Edward Condon, and in 1944 he was part of the U.S. atomic bomb project, but he was let go early on in that program for unspecified reasons, but it had to do something with security. In 46, he was head of the National Bureau of Standards. In 1947, he was accused of being a Soviet spy by J. Edgar Hoover. And in 1951, he lost his security clearance. Well, in 1966, the Air Force came to him, this is documented, and offered reinstatement of his security clearance if he would do this UFO study for the Air Force. This was the beginning of the Air Force attempt to whitewash this subject to the public and claim that there was no reason to continue. And this was sort of a predetermined position that the Air Force took, and wanted to perform what I consider a false investigation. So this is just a statement. Oops. Something's wrong with the picture here. This is the two photographs. One is of Ray Fowler, and the other one is Dr. Roy Craig. Ray Fowler was working for NICAP, I believe, at the time of the incidents. He was also the head of the group in working under Sylvania Corporation that had the electrical contract for the Minuteman system. When the incidents occurred at Malmstrom, he was notified, and he immediately reported it to the Condon investigation, which was ongoing. Condon's chief investigator was Dr. Roy Craig. And so Roy Craig came out to visit Fowler. Fowler gave him all the information about the reports he got from the field, that there was indeed a UFO incident, that UFOs were seen during the time of the shutdowns. This picture is one of Dr. Lewis Chase, Lieutenant Colonel. He was the operations officer at Malmstrom Air Force Base, but he was also the UFO contact officer for the Condon investigation. And as part of that, he went to a meeting in June of 1967 with the other Condon team, and came back and wrote this memo for the record. And I'll just read parts of it as a result of this meeting. Although the university study has approximately 8 months to run, and barring any dramatic events, the conclusions in the initial formal report will most likely read A, there is no evidence to support a hypothesis that extraterrestrials have visited the Earth. And B, certain events have occurred that are difficult to explain due to lack of conclusive data and or instrumentation and state-of-the-art of the investigative procedures. So they had essentially decided in June of '67 that there would be no evidence presented in their reports on UFO activity. So this is essentially clear evidence that a cover-up had been organized prior to the completion of the Condon investigation. Yeah, this is a statement from Robert Kaminsky. Kaminsky was the Boeing team leader. Boeing had the overall contract for the Minuteman missile system. So they had the control over all the equipment as far as design and investigation. So they had a responsibility to investigate any issues with the system. And certainly he was appointed to investigate the Echo flight incident. He was in charge. And as they were about to issue a final report in which they had found no cause that could explain the shutdown, he was told by his supervisor that it was a UFO event. And days later, the Air Force told Boeing not to write their report. Very unusual because Boeing, like I said, was responsible for the correct operation of this equipment. And they were told not to finish their report by the Air Force. And of course, the reason the Air Force did not want a final report because they were concerned the Condon Committee would use that as evidence of the existence of UFOs around missile bases. So this is just part of the letter that Kaminsky wrote, just basically saying what I just said. Now, Dr. Roy Craig, after getting the information from Raymond Fowler, went to Malmstrom Air Force Base. You can see some of his notes here. These are his handwritten notes about things he wanted to talk to Colonel Chase about. And so he did talk to Colonel Chase about these incidents, and Chase was surprised he even knew about it, and because it was highly secretive, of course. So he tells Craig that he cannot investigate. This is too secretive, that the Air Force is doing their own investigation, and that if he did want to see the result of the Air Force report, he needs to go to Washington, D.C. and talk to this a high-level person in the Air Force. The little note he wrote to Robert Lowe. Lowe was the deputy of Edward Condon, and so he talked to Lowe about this, and Lowe was the only one who could review classified documents. And Lowe says he thinks the Air Force will have this classified too high to review by the Condon team, and also gives some this rationale of nuclear testing as a cause of the shutdowns. Well, my investigator and I checked. There were no nuclear tests during the period, even a month before or after these shutdowns. So nuclear testing, which generally gives out some EMP, electromagnetic pulse, were not being done at the time. So this was bogus. But the point is, they did not take the time, the Condon investigators did not take the time to review the Air Force investigation of the shutdown. Now, later, pardon me, there was a letter from Foreign Technology Division just after the incidents. Foreign Technology Division at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, you know it better as Blue Book. Pardon me. And they had heard about these shutdowns as being UFO related, and wrote a letter to Colonel Chase asking about possible missile failures during this UFO activity of March 24th, the date of my incident. Well, Colonel Chase writes back to Blue Book and says he has no knowledge of equipment failures during UFO sightings activities. This is an obvious lie by Colonel Chase. He was part of the cover-up. They were covering this up. So he lied directly to Blue Book about these incidents. He knew full well he had been briefed completely, because I briefed my squadron commander the next day. This, again, these two letters are evidence of the cover-up. So just briefly reviewing, Edward Condon's chief investigator was Dr. Roy Craig. Raymond Fowler contacted Roy Craig, told him about the Echo and Oscar incidents. Roy Craig went to see Chase. Chase told him there was nothing to it. No UFOs were involved, and but he couldn't continue his investigation at Malmstrom. As a result, these incidents were never included in the Condon study, but indeed, as a result of the Condon study, the Air Force issued a position paper or fact sheet on UFOs stating that, the decision to continue UFO investigation was based on evaluation of the University of Colorado's scientific study on flying objects, and as a result of these investigations and from UFO reports since 1948, Project Blue Book, no UFO report investigated and evaluated by the Air Force was ever an indication of threat to our national security. That's completely false, because we did, like I said, lose 20 missiles within the span of 8 days. These were nuclear missiles, part of our so-called strategic defense system. And that was only part of it, because there have been many other such incidents, and I list a few names here. Lieutenant Dave Schindele, David Scott, Bruce Fenstermacher, Colonel Halt, Jerry Nelson, and Pat McDonough. These are all gentlemen that have presented at conferences and with affidavits under their own signature of UFO events over nuclear bases. For example, this is Dave Schindele's statements, and this occurred in 1966, August of 66, actually. There was an incident, and in September of 66, David Schindele relieved the crew whose missiles were also disabled by UFOs, and it was written up in the Minot Daily News here, newspaper report. But Schindele has actually written a book about his incident, and very similar to mine, except Schindele was not in charge of the missiles at the time, but he knew where this thing. That was September of 1966. This is The picture is distorted here, but this is McDonough. He was in the Navy, but he was at it trying to set up a site again in 1966 when a UFO came over, and he observed it immediately above the missiles. And this is Bruce Fenstermacher. He was at Warren Air Force Base in 1976. UFOs came over, his guards shot at it. It hovered right above the facility. His guards shot at it, and I believe, and no, I'm sorry, I'm mistaken about this one. But the UFO came over and disrupted his operational systems. And this is Colonel Charles Halt, obviously at RAF Bentwaters in England, UK, 1980. The reason this was over 3 days, but initially the UFO had flown over the weapons storage area where nuclear weapons were kept. These were tactical nuclear weapons, I believe, that were part of the NATO system at the time. And the UFO came over and just shone a ray of light over the weapons storage area and then flew off. Atlas missile system at Walker Air Force Base in 1964. This is Lieutenant Nelson. Again, UFO came over and disrupted operations with the Atlas missile. So here we have the testimony of a man I'll call Tex. He did not want to go public, but he was one of the technicians that was bringing one of Echo Flight's missiles back on alert. So he had a guard up top and went down into this maintenance bay area to restart the missile. When his guard called down, said there was something above him at the time. So Tex goes back up and looks up and sees this orange ball of light hovering above the missile. And for some reason, Tex goes back down and tells the guard to report it to the command post, but he goes back down to continue restarting this missile to bring it back up on alert, because that was of prime importance. And as he went through his checklist, at a particular point, the missile was shut down again. Now he continued it to start over, and when he got to this particular point of the checklist, the missile would again shut down. He kept doing this many, many times. And what was clear to him is this object hovering above him knew exactly how our systems worked and exactly what he was doing when he was starting up this missile. So to me, this is very dramatic. I point this one out. This is a report from Major Bradford Runyon. He was a B-52 pilot flying into Minot Air Force Base in 1968. And he was told by a general officer as he was about to land the B-52, he was told to turn around and fly over this missile site, because Minot Air Force Base was also a missile base. And so he flew over this particular missile site, saw this object on the ground. It was glowing red and had a blue light and other colors here. You can see it had a kind of extension to it, but it was landed on the ground. And he drew this little sketch of it. You'll see the sketch up there. When he landed the B-52, he had a debriefing with the general officer, and the general told him that, in fact, this UFO had crushed the fencing around this facility, and indeed had taken the 20-ton launch facility cover completely off its location. Now, this thing is on rails. It weighs 20 tons. Very difficult to move. But this had been taken off and placed to the side during this UFO encounter. What I showed there was the large stones in Peru near Cusco, which has always been a question mark of how these stones could have been moved. They weigh tons. At any rate, we'll move on. This is a listing, partial listing of UFOs and nuclear facilities. 1945, UFOs were chased by Navy pilots over Hanford. This was even before the first atomic bomb test. Hanford was producing at the time plutonium for the first atomic bombs. Of course, in 1947, the Roswell base was the only nuclear bomb base in the U.S. at the time, or in the world for that matter. I've highlighted some more here. 1959, Beale Air Force Base. All of these are documented with witnesses. I have written about them in my book, Ramey Air Force Base. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, UFOs flew over while B-52s were on the flight line. We were in a DEFCON condition 2. Vandenberg Air Force Base, 1964. UFOs flying rings around a nose cone of an Atlas missile during flight over a Pacific test range. This was documented on videotape and later confiscated by the CIA. This had the other witness. There were 2 witnesses, Robert Jacobs and Major Mansman. 76, this is one where the guards 180 rounds with no effect at a UFO hovering right above the launch facility. Sjosterberg might be of interest to you because it is in the Netherlands. 1979, UFOs fly down the flight line for an extended period, and again shining a beam of light. Sjosterberg base was a nuclear weapons base they had stored there, and it was part of NATO. They had small jet aircraft that were able to carry tactical nuclear weapons. Again, we have not only Josie Zwinenberg, but many other witnesses, 12 other witnesses along the flight line. These were military who actually went on the radio and talked about this soon after it occurred. So here's a picture of Josie. Here's what she saw. She was riding her horse in this particular area next to the base and or nearby the base. And large object, multicolored lights around it. And the drawing to the right is a sketch that I drew based on the document, the testimony of the military witnesses who saw this object fly down the flight line, and again shining a beam of light, in this case red light, looking for weapon storage, the nuclear weapons that were stored there. So this is just one, and this is a very well documented incident, and I think there will be in the future a specific documentary made on this. I'm talking about the international cabal. I believe there's an international UFO cabal that is collecting information about UFO incidents in secret, and we'll go on and talk about this a little more. I'm just trying to make a case here of the existence of this cabal. Again, in Roswell, there was a cover-up there. I won't go into details, but in 1948, there was an estimate of the situation done by Blue Book. General Vandenberg, who ordered the briefing on this, disclaimed all the evidence, even though there was substantial evidence of these objects appearing over military bases. Wilbert Smith memo of 1950 wrote that there was a secret group studying the UFO question in Washington, D.C. In 1953, Robertson panel, which met in secret and decided they would have a disinformation program so that the public would not know about the reality of the UFO problem. 66, the Khan investigation, and the other statement here I have is there is much evidence, really, of international collusion and cooperation with the U.S. To keep these UFO secrets. And I mentioned Varginha case in Brazil and the Rendlesham case. So there are activities to silence witnesses, intimidate witnesses, and organize efforts to discredit the whole phenomenon. So this is just something I drew. If the Cabal core group would have other groups working with it, and these are all secret groups, probably embedded in intelligence agencies throughout the world. And you can see the type of activities they would be involved in: retrieval of artifacts, whole craft, analyze technical data they retrieve and distribute it to work with industry for new technologies, operations, intelligence ops, weapons development, obviously, paranormal effects, liaison with foreign governments and institutions, monitoring and analysis and financial operations. So what's this all about? Essentially, it's nuclear weapons as far as I'm concerned. So this is just an image of the atomic bomb blast at Nagasaki, August 9th, 1945. Here's the city of Nagasaki to the left before the blast, and here's the city of Nagasaki to the right after the blast, and you can see the horrendous damage that was done. And this was only from a 15 kiloton atomic bomb. This graph shows the buildup of nuclear weapons starting in the late 40s on up. It peaked out in about 67. Let's see. I'm sorry. This is nuclear weapons. So, but you see, we have made an attempt to decrease the number of nuclear weapons. However, there's still it's still a very dangerous world. We still have 1,800 warheads that are deployed, and 1,650 of those are on ballistic missiles. Largest weapon was 1.2 megatons. That's million tons of TNT. The Hiroshima weapon was only 15 kilotons. And the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists have their doomsday clock set at 2 minutes before midnight because of the current threat of nuclear war. Currently, the U.S. And other countries have this so-called idea of nuclear deterrence, and that is if they fear a nuclear attack, but it has encouraged other nations to develop nuclear weapons. So possession of nukes increases the ability to have a nuclear war and threaten others and blackmail them in this environment of fear. Currently, we have 9 nuclear states, and probably North Korea would make it 10. So we're still in a very serious situation. As a matter of fact, Pakistan and India both have nuclear capability, and they are currently engaged in a hot war between themselves. And it is a tenet of military operations that if you have weapons, use them against your enemy no matter what. So this is a very possible danger and risk to the world that nuclear weapons will be used again. So this is the Hanford site. We're talking now about nuclear facilities, nuclear reactors. It was the first full-scale plutonium production reactor in the world. Plutonium was manufactured since 1944, and as a result, this is the Columbia River, has been polluted by nuclear waste from buried containers, and has been responsible for causing cancers in local inhabitants, and of course ruined the salmon, fish, halibut habitat in the Columbia. We all know about Fukushima, March 11th, 2011. There was a tsunami from an earthquake that swamped the reactor at Fukushima and resulted in a core meltdown because the pumps could not, the cooling pumps did not work properly, and the radioactive material melted down. There was explosions and fires, and much radioactive material was released into the atmosphere, into the ocean, and has caused untold amount of damage, and continues. The recovery efforts continue to this day. Let's talk about a little about abductions, because we will be discussing this a little bit further on. But abductions by extraterrestrials operating these UFOs are definitely a part of the phenomenon. This is a little cartoon done by a friend of mine, Jean-Pierre Petit. Yeah, it's in French, but I translated it. It says, "I wonder what they are trying to make us understand by doing all these things to us," which is a question I think many abductees would ask. So the number of experiences could be in the millions. People do not generally recall details. For some reason, children have been abducted also, and taken to certain schools on paranormal issues like telepathy, etc. There is a hybrid breeding program apparently going on. Adults too are trained in paranormal abilities and told that they will have a role to play sometime in the future in something. Experiencers are also warned about future disasters. So these are the kinds of things that happen during abductions. And I will talk about my own abduction in a little while. Why don't I finish this presentation, and then Marilyn will come back and join me. This is a book by Susie Hansen. I think Pia knows Susie well. It's called The Dual Soul Connection. But she talks about being taken underwater to an underwater base. And as they are approaching the entrance underwater to this base, they go through an energy field, simply a field that's keeping out entering this opening, which is pretty amazing. I just wanted to point that out. So this is another area of the phenomenon that there is evidence to support that extraterrestrials seem to have underwater bases, and indeed based in mountains, by the way, here on Earth. I highly recommend this book by Susie Hansen, by the way. So I'm almost finished here. I think there's a message from our ET visitors. You're not alone. we also live in this part of the cosmos, and they're asking us to eliminate our nuclear weapons and warfare, and to raise our level of consciousness and concern so that our planet and its precious life. I think these are all messages that we are being sent. They are good messages, I believe. So those of you that are listening to this presentation, keep questioning people like myself that present their stories. Decide if you think there's sufficient proof, and if you're convinced there is a body of credible evidence, accept it as real and work with us for disclosure. There's a multitude of life that exists in the universe, and we must live in harmony with it. And that is the main reason I think the ETs have not contacted us, that they see that we are having difficulty living in harmony. So we have to deal with it together. I just wanted to show in the next slide the books that I've written. Faded Giant talks about the Oscar and Echo incidents at Malmstrom Air Force Base in more detail. And the last book I wrote was Unidentified, the UFO Phenomenon, and talks in general about the entire phenomenon. Well, thank you for your attention. I think I'll invite Marilyn to join us, and we can talk about our abduction experiences.
That would be great. Thank you for the presentation.
Well, I'm happy to do it.
Thanks.
Okay, I'll start first and talk about my abduction experience. 1985, Marilyn and I were living in a particular house, Manhattan Beach, California. We had two small children in the house, and sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up and saw blue light emanating from the living room. I shook Marilyn awake and said, "Do you see that blue light coming from the living room?" And she confirmed yes. And so I told her I was going to get up and investigate. And but as I started to get up, I was paralyzed. I couldn't move. And I recall struggling very hard to get my mobility back, but I was completely paralyzed. And I was able to turn my head and ask Marilyn for help, but at this point she was unconscious, even though it doesn't make sense that she would be unconscious, but she was. The next thing I recall is other small beings in the room. I don't recall in detail what they looked like. It was dark. And also another being in the doorway, taller being, had a hood on, but I could not make out the face. And the next thing I recall, and by the way, all of this that I'm reporting now was derived from 4 sessions of hypnotherapy that I had with people, and finally able to recover these memories. But the next thing I recall was being lifted off the bed and taken towards the window. The window of our bedroom was locked. I remember locking it and thinking they did not know how to open the window, but didn't matter. I was taken through the window, actually through the window without it being open. And after that, I recall being on the craft, or on a table actually on the craft, and being shown a needle. Now, I had told this many times in past years, trying to think when I first talked about this, but I saw the needle being held by some long, bony fingers. I remember what those fingers look like. At any rate, let me continue. And they communicated to me that they would be inserting this needle into my groin area, and that it would not be painful, but indeed when they started to do it, it was extremely painful. And when I communicated this to them, it was very painful. The pain went away almost immediately. So the pain was gone. After that, I was sent, I went to another location, and craft, and this other extraterrestrial turned me around, poked his fingers down my spine. I don't know why, but that's what they did. After that, I was escorted back by two extraterrestrials, and again, we were floating during this time, and a puff of white light, and I was back in my bed. The next day, I didn't remember any of this. Marilyn didn't remember any of this. We did not speak of this until I think it was 2007. So 2007, we were in Ireland, and there was a presentation going on by an abductee, and the lady mentioned that she had seen a blue light in her room during her abduction. Marilyn was there with me, sitting next to me while we were listening. I turned to her, and because this sparked a memory, and said, "Do you remember seeing a blue light in our bedroom at any time?" And she confirmed, "Yes, indeed." So, like I said, this very briefly is what happened to me and I have discussed this openly in my presentations for many years now, because I wanted to validate the testimonies of many other abductees. So I'll turn it over to Marilyn, and she can tell you about one or more of her instances.
Okay.
Get closer.
The blue light that my husband talked about that happened in the mid 80s when we lived in a town in the beach area, Los Angeles. I remember opening my eyes and seeing a grayish blue light that looked very foggy looking, and we had no lights on that we would keep on in the house. I had no idea where that was coming from. I think there were probably other instances where similar things must have happened, because I don't remember some of what Bob talked about, but I know that I did see a grayish blue light, looked like a fog almost, that was lit up, that came down the hallway by our bedroom area. The next experience that I want to talk about is something that happened about 5 years ago this month, and here in the house that we live in California. I had gone to bed that night. To back up just a little bit, we had somebody at the house who came to detect. He had metal detectors and black lights and things like that to detect if there was any ET presence in the house, because we had felt that things were going on here that had happened previously that I wanted some kind of confirmation. So he came on a Friday night, and indeed there were signs that things were here, that there was a presence here in the house, and he liked to show us, fingerprints on a wall. He put a black light on our hands, and on my hand there was a half circle of a neon blue light that I could not see if the black light wasn't on. and on Bob's hand there was a red neon light. So at that point, that was on a Friday night. The following Monday, Tuesday, I had a dream, and I rarely remember my dreams. I know I dream every night, but unless I really focus on something, when I wake up, it just sort of vanishes. But this really impacted me. And what happened in the dream, and to remind people that many times abductions can happen, but somehow they veil the experience for many people, and it becomes a more or less a dream state experience. Probably not as to not frighten people of the real experience, but anyway, in the dream, I had a tall white come to me. And it wasn't the typical gray that a lot of people associate ETs with. It was a really powder white skin, smaller eyes, no hair, but a very loving presence. She, because it felt like a female, feminine energy, she took me by the hand and took me out through either the wall or a dimension. And I say that because it's just in our reality, in our dimensional reality, going through a wall isn't always, it's something people laugh about. But there have been many people who have talked about being taken, again, through walls and windows and doors and closed windows, not open windows, like my husband talked about. So somehow they can manage to do that. But the reason I say it could be a dimension, because in the process of being taken, I saw this blast of white light, and the white light was coming from a core centered position and shooting out in all directions. After that, I remembered nothing more about the experience, but I did remember that much when I woke up the next morning. To give me some confirmation about that the experience was real, I started to notice some things on my body, like puncture marks in the shape of triangles. I had two of them, one on my wrist and another one up on my upper left arm. And in addition to the puncture marks that formed a triangle, I also had something that looked like somebody took an X-Acto knife and went across my skin. It was not bleeding, but it was reddened. And then I also had red restraining marks, as though I was being, held or something. And that was on my upper right shoulder, close to the area where the other triangle puncture marks were. About 2 days after that, I was just simply touching the top of my head, moving my hair, and I realized that every hair hurt on the top of my head to move it. And there was a big bump up there. So I didn't say anything to my husband about it, except, would you please touch the top of my head and let me know what you think? So he said, sure. So he touched it and he said, there's a bump up there. And I said, yeah, there is a bump up there. And then I explained to him about, how my hair hurt to move. And that actually lasted for a few days. And then it eventually went away, as did the marks that formed the triangles. So that was an experience that I never forgot. And as a matter of fact, within the past month, my husband and I had gone down into Ventura, which is a city close by to where we live. And in the process of going past what was a new store, a new Starbucks coffee shop, I saw an image. And it took me back, because the image reminded me very much of what I saw when I went through this dream state. And going through, I'm trying to retrieve this image for you so that I could show you exactly what it was. that I saw as I moved through this dimension. So if you could just give me a moment here. I'm trying to,
Well,
excuse me.
No,
would you look for it in there? Mm-hmm. So it so moved me and impressed me that it was so similar to what I saw when I was taken through this experience, that I was able to track down the artist. And it's a huge wall mosaic. And she was a local artist in Ventura, and the people in the coffee shop at Starbucks knew her first name but didn't know anymore. So I was able to just put that information into a Google search and found her. So she confirmed. Now I'm going to hold this up and I'm going to show you what this, I don't know if you can see the image.
Can you see that?
Can you see that? Can you see that image?
We can see it. It's a lot of colors. Can't really make out what it is.
Okay. It essentially, the core part of it is in the upper part of the picture, and from there's all these blasts of light that come out from it. And that was, even though she has a lot of color in her wall art there, mine was more white, but it was moving, and it had like a silvery effect to it, a white and silver, because I knew that there was movement and things were being blasted from the core center. So when I talked to her about that and told her my experience, she said, indeed, she said that when she did that artwork, what she had in mind was a portal and or a dimension, whatever you want to call it. So it really fit in with what my experience was. And I was really happy to make a connection with her. And she's the first person that I've talked to. I would like to talk this experience in that department, but at least, you know, she did it in a way that it really, it had an impact on me. The other thing I had happen to me about 2 to 3 years ago is I had gone to bed. Bob was in bed already, and I wasn't asleep, but I had my eyes closed. And in the process of trying to go to sleep, all of a sudden I heard a sound, and it was in the room. It was a very loud sound. We have something over here in the United States called an Amber Alert, where it's like a foghorn type thing, and we receive those messages on our cell phones to let us know if there's an emergency of some kind. This was that same kind of sound, only we don't keep our cell phones in our bedroom. And usually that rings out twice, that alert, that Amber Alert. This was just once, and it made me pop my eyes open. And in front of me, no more than about 2 to 3 feet away from our bed and where I was laying down, there was this lighted symbol, and it was arced, and there were like white lines, and then the black and more white, black, white, black, and then like a bullseye light at the bottom, in the shape of a pyramid, upside down pyramid. So I was surprised about that. Needless to say, nothing like that ever happened to me before either. And the next morning I told Bob about it, and he said, well, what do you think? What are they trying to tell you? Because we knew it was something that was paranormal, of course. And so I said, you know, I don't know. And so I started thinking more and more about, you know, what that symbol might mean. And later on, he came home from work that day and he said, you've seen that symbol before. You know what that symbol is. And I said, well, it's familiar, but I really don't know where I've seen it. He said, well, think about it. I said, okay, I did. I still don't know where. So he said, it's the Wi-Fi symbol. And I said, oh my God, you're right. It is the Wi-Fi symbol. And so from that, I put those pieces together and concluded that the ETs were trying to tell me that they're in communication, because that symbol stands for communication. So that is, you know, another experience. Something seems to happen almost just for people who have been through experiences. You might note that the anniversary time of your major experience, you might also have something happen that it's like they're checking back in with you. You're putting other marks on your arm, or, you know, something paranormal happens. So don't be surprised if you, around that date, within a matter of weeks of when you had an original experience that was so profound, you will probably have some follow-up.
Okay, Pia, I think it might be time to answer any questions at this point.
Sure. Okay, we'll do that.
Uh,
If anyone wants to ask a question, just write, and I'll put you on. I'll begin because I do have a question. I have a question for both of you, but I'll begin with Marilyn's question. There's a lot of talk about consciousness, and Grant Cameron has been speaking quite a bit about becoming an antenna, kind of being a person who receives these messages and can come in contact with the aliens. I know you work as a healer, and I was thinking, has your ability to heal, do you believe it comes from these contacts you've had? And do you see yourself as an antenna? Do you feel that that's
okay. I do believe we're all antennas. Just some of us are more aware about it than others, and we embrace it rather than live in fear about it. I personally, I've been doing healing work since the early 90s, around 93, when we lived in Indonesia, Jakarta. The gentleman who I met over there, who has an ashram, his name is Anand Krishna, and he was the one who told me that I was a healer. With that, it felt right, but I didn't know what to do about it, and he simply told me to start activating my hands. And so where that came from, I can't tell you for sure, but I do know that over a period of time, the healing gifts that came through me were increased, were accentuated as I gained greater understandings in how to work with sound, how to work with color, how to work with intention, and above all, how to work with unconditional love, because to me, that is healer. I do think that our ET friends play a part, but since they are also in the spirit world, so to speak, we can't see them. They're multidimensional for the most part, and so it's difficult for me to absolutely say that this is where it comes from. I've been told that I was a healer in past lives, and that felt right too, because it just came so easily to me when I started to, had that full awareness about, the gift that I possessed, that spirit gave. It works through me and works through anybody who brings through that beautiful healing energy of love.
Okay, thank you. I have a question for Robert. John Burroughs, he came forth a few months ago saying that he had some DNA tests done together with Kit Green, Hal Puthoff, and that he had some very unique kind of a DNA. Have you been contacted also to get your DNA checked by some of these people that are now, at least Hal Puthoff is working with the To the Stars Academy and has been involved in all of these different projects along the way?
No, I haven't been contacted by Mr. Puthoff about that. I have had my DNA test done, but it was through one of these commercial things.
23andMe, I think it was, and I had it through Ancestry.com. But I have heard about 1% of the people who have, some people who have the DNA test will register a 1% unknown. And interestingly enough, mine doesn't, I'm, pretty much across the board, 100% noted that I'm from different places on this planet, but there were no unknowns. But interestingly enough, my granddaughter has a 1% unknown. So I don't know how all that figures into, what that means, and if it jumps generations somehow or pops up now and then, I have no idea. But I have heard about this 1% unknown. Is that what you're talking about?
It's also where they have been checking some military witnesses to see if there's anything in their DNA that's kind of abnormal, something that's changed in people's DNA. Just like John Burroughs, he was very close to a UFO. So, oh, okay, cell phone. And that's why they haven't mentioned other witnesses except John Burroughs. And I thought maybe because Robert and some of these other witnesses were military people, they might have also been contacted. Yeah. Okay, Carsten, he has a question. So Carsten will come on now.
Okay.
Yeah, I do have a question, but it was Christian Pia, but that's okay. I do have a question though to Robert. Why do you think that the obvious thing about keeping UFO secrets of the weapons side, with nuclear weapons and stuff, but why do you think that the government actually is doing all this cover up, other than the weapon part? Do you have any idea about that?
Yeah, well, the weapon part is obvious. They don't know how to protect the weapons against interference by UFOs. But other than weapons, I think it's a question of greed and power, because I'm convinced that the cabal, this UFO cabal, it's an international cabal where different elements of intelligence agencies in various countries are sharing information about what they know about the phenomenon, especially the ones that where they retrieve machines and they derive some advanced technology. These secrets are very valuable, and in the respect that they can be transformed into some type of weaponry or some new technology. So there's a financial or monetary incentive to keep these secrets or use them as trade material for with other intelligence agencies. So I think it's power and greed are the prime reasons the secrets are being held.
Okay, thank you. Christian has a question for you. So come on now.
Okay.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah. George Knapp was on this Skinwalker Ranch, and he said something about the phenomena attach themselves to the witnesses of the UFOs. And also Grant Cameron says that if you see one UFO, you're part of the game. So do you think that your experience with the UFOs and them being next to the missiles were a part of your adoption, that you're a part of the game now?
Well, of course, this is speculation on my part, but the answer is yes. I think they have been, my abduction experience was, the reason I was abducted is because I was a witness to the incident in Montana. And I think they are, let's say, to speak out against nuclear war, which I have been doing. I do this every time I speak. I bring up the nuclear war issue because it is a very serious one, obviously, that could destroy all of civilization if we were to have a world war where nuclear weapons were used. So, yes, I think, well, I'm part of the game, as you put it.
Yeah. Have you heard about those incidents lately at Malmstrom? And do you know anybody who have been involved with this?
No, I have not heard of any recent incidents at Malmstrom. The last I heard was from 2010 at Warren Air Force Base in Nebraska, I think, where 50 missiles were shot down during a time when UFOs were seen in the skies. But
Because
I haven't heard any recent.
yeah, because Senator Reid talked about scores of men seeing UFOs at missile silos. So, and he just brought up another one, and it was just discussed online. So I thought you maybe you knew something.
I'm not aware of that one. I'll have to look into that.
All right. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
Carsten.
you.
Carsten has a question for you. So just a minute.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a question. It's actually for your wife.
Okay, we'll put
did
it
you,
on.
yeah, did your ability to heal people, was there an ability that you got from the ETs, or was it something that you had when you also was a child?
No, it's Catholic. And of course, I was never taught anything like that. And I went to Catholic schools, grade school through high school. Never was taught anything like that. But curiously enough, when I was young, probably somewhere around 10 years old or so, I felt that I could put my hands on somebody and help heal them somehow. Where that came from, I have no idea. So I do believe that I was a healer in past lives. It came to me so easily once a non-Krishna told me that I was a healer. Where that really comes from, you know, when you talk about spirit, you talk about extraterrestrials, it's all one to begin with. I mean, everything is one. So it's hard to really, you know, put it in a certain drawer, say, and identify it that way, when it's much more complex than that. I think it was simply that I was a healer in past lives, and part of my experience in this life was to revisit that and to be told that, so that I could bring myself into position to start working with people again. And I thoroughly enjoyed that. I did it for over 20 years. Now I'm involved in aromatherapy business, so I had to let some things go. I figured I could do more to help people with my aromatherapy products than working one by one with, you know, individuals in my home. So, but I did do, and then still I do healing work on my husband and friends and family. So I haven't let it go. And it's always, always, always there. It doesn't take more than a millisecond to bring that in and to you know, get heart-centered with the unconditional love and just let it flow through my hands.
Okay, we have a question from Steve. So he'll be on.
Yeah. What do you think of Gary McKinnon's and Bob Lazar's stories, and do you believe that the US has a working UFO fleet? Hello? Yeah.
I missed the first part of your question. Can you repeat it?
Yeah. What do you think of McKinnon's and the SARS stories? And do you think that the US has a working UFO fleet?
Oh, I see. I have no reason to believe that the U.S. has a working UFO fleet, a space command or something like, I mean, a Starfleet command. No, I have no knowledge of that.
Okay. Good. It's all right.
Thank you.
Okay. I don't know if any other people at the moment have any questions. I would like to hear what your opinion is on all the new things that's happened since December 2017 with the To the Stars Academy. How do you view this surprising turn of events with the ATIP program and the videos coming out now from the Pentagon? Do you think that they're slowly releasing things? Is it a...
Let me put it this way. I'm happy for the fact that Senator Reid, especially, has admitted that the government did have a unit investigating the UFO question in secret, obviously. However, this To the Stars Academy, I still have, let's say, some concern about what we will achieve from them, or what they will reveal. The main reason I say that is they all seem to be connected to Robert Bigelow, and Bigelow has already stated publicly he's been following the UFO phenomenon for some time, but in the background, those researchers like myself who have known about Bigelow, I met Bigelow back in 1999. He came to visit me and wanted to see all my data, etc. But he's been collecting information for a long time now, but not revealing much or analyzing it, at least not publicly. So I have my suspicions about whether or not he's working, why he is so interested in this, and whether or not he is working with the cabal, for example. So I'm a little skeptical about this To the Stars Academy, and whether or not they will actually reveal things that we don't know, and whether or not they can verify and justify it. And let's just say I've got an open mind about it at this point.
Okay, we're running out of time, I'm sorry to say, but thank you both so much for sharing your information and spending time with us. So we'll soon be signing out, and take good care. Hope to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to share personal stories.
Thank you, Pia.
Thanks a lot, Pia. Thank you.
See you somewhere out there.
See you somewhere.
Yeah, take good care. Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.